This chapter, as you probably guessed from the title, is a history lesson. However, it's still important to know how this field has grown, what things we've previously looked at, what's worked, what hasn't, and what things we've modified over time. Like we touched on last time, one of the earliest use cases of psychological testing was around diagnosis, starting specifically with diagnosis of developmentally delayed. Previously, not a lot of special care or attention given, neglect, torture for this particular population of interest. However, once countries began creating actual institutions that specialize in care for people with developmental delays or other mental diagnoses, we needed some type of objective criteria to identify which people actually should be admitted into those facilities. Beyond that, we use psychological testing, or at this point, historically used to tailor what types of interventions were used. Identifying different diagnoses based on the types of treatments that are needed. So there's going to be a different treatment for developmental delays versus psychological pathologies that impact your cognitive functioning. Think something like schizophrenia. Now, current day psychological testing is focused on individual differences. So last time I talked a lot about conscientiousness and other personality traits. We're interested in seeing what your individual level of a given construct is to be able to predict how you're going to respond in certain situations or how you're most likely to respond. Starting out though, experimental psychologists, especially early on, were very focused on developing generalized descriptions of human behavior, i.e., in this situation, what is the expected way that all people are going to react? And actually, that is useful information. It's the underlying principle behind norms. However, the massive limitation with this approach is that individual differences are treated as error. So if I know that in a scary movie, people are expected to jump or scream or something that indicates fright, but Susie is watching this scary movie and is totally not fazed. From an analysis perspective, we would label her as a statistical outlier and discard her data. But actually, that difference from what the general expectation is extremely valuable. It's not actually error. There's something underlying that is meaningfully different. Maybe Susie is much lower on reactivity or much higher on composure than compared to the general public. If we simply tag her behavior as error, we're missing out on meaningful data. One other thing to note here, early research was built on things that we could physically and objectively measure, light sensitivity, reaction time, compared to now where there's a much heavier focus on measuring things that we can't directly observe, like intelligence, personality, competence, and certain knowledge and skills. As part of this research, psychologists found that criteria that we had covered in the previous chapter, the wording of instructions, room conditions, all influenced the end result, which really highlighted the need for and importance of standardization in testing. One of the heavy hitters in the early testing movement is Francis Galton. Galton's training and background were in Darwinian theory of evolution. So he was very interested in eugenics, or the science behind human heredity. Are there traits or manifestations of traits that are more likely to occur in people who are related? Think siblings or parent-child relationships, compared to people who are not related to each other. So as part of his anthropometric lab, which is essentially just a lab where a researcher is measuring physical characteristics about a person: height, size, how proportionate you are, vision. He kept records on a variety of physical characteristics about each person that participated in his lab. And this is really our first foray into individual differences. The work that Galton did provided credence to the fact that there are individual differences between people, and those differences are an error. For example, if your parents are both 6'5", but the average height at that time is 5'7", it's not error that you're much more likely to be closer to 6'5" than you are 5'7". In fact, it would be an anomaly to not be that height. But Galton's contributions extend even beyond that. First, he proposed that we could take what we know about your physical characteristics and use that to predict things that we can't directly observe, namely intelligence. So, for example, if you have good depth perception, strong vision, quicker reaction times, you can take in more information, which increases your ability to make sound decisions, and thus you're likely more intelligent compared to someone who is much weaker in those areas. We've definitely made a lot of refinement here, but this was, for the time, a radical departure from how we'd previously conceptualized human behavior. Also, Galton expanded what types of measures we collected. As opposed to being limited to just physical things we could objectively measure, he incorporated rating scales, free association, and then took it a step further by applying statistical transformation to those data in order to inform other kinds of inferences. Next up is James Cattell. Building off of Galton's work, Cattell was interested in mental tests, or essentially ways of measuring intelligence. At this point, we're still focused on measuring mental ability by using physical things as proxies. Things like muscular strength, sensitivity to pain, vision, memory. Again, not all of these things have withstood the test of time, but for this time period, this was fairly advanced work. Then in the early 1900s, Alfred Binet comes into play. Similar to Cattell, his primary focus was intelligence tests. His early intelligence test was a series of problems that increased in level of difficulty. But unlike the other tests at this time, there was less emphasis on physical metrics and more emphasis on things like judgment, comprehension, and reasoning, which even to this day we still consider essential components of intelligence. This test was refined over time, updating questions, but also this is the first time we're seeing norming come into play. Binet established levels that corresponded to the questions on the test, so that based on what types of questions a child was getting correct, we'd be able to establish their quote-unquote mental age. Now, up until now, we've been fairly focused on individual testing. And even today, not all, but a vast majority of psychological testing is very focused on the individual. That means that, especially at this point in time, this point being historically, that the examiner had to sit down with each person individually and administer the assessment. There were no computer tests back in the early 1900s. This very quickly becomes unscalable when you need to evaluate thousands of people. Leading up to World War I, there was a pressing need to be able to rapidly assess what assignment or type of service people who were being drafted needed to serve in. It's clearly not feasible to sit down with each individual person and do an hours-long test. So instead, Army psychologists designed the Army Alpha and Army Beta, both tests that were designed to assess intelligence in a group setting. Not how smart you are in a group, but rather measure everyone's level of intelligence in one sitting. Now, these tests are no longer in use for a lot of different reasons, but it was a solution that was developed for a very specific use case and for a period of time served that purpose reasonably well. Now, up until now, we've talked primarily about intelligence tests. However, intelligence isn't everything, especially when we've primarily measured it in terms of verbal and to a certain extent numerical ability. Also, a callback to why it's so critical to fully define the behavior you want to measure. But if we think about this from a hiring context, intelligence isn't the only thing that matters. In my day job, I need to be able to design and conduct research studies. I need to be able to analyze data. I need to know how to do job analysis. If I'm only evaluated on general mental ability, my boss would have no idea if I could actually do the things that they're hiring me to do. Intelligence is only going to take me so far. Similarly, just because you're good at verbal ability doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be good at mathematical ability. So an intelligence test may not fully uncover where your strengths lie. This is where aptitude testing comes into play. Instead of saying, hey, we have this one individual number that represents your total intelligence, we can break out the different facets of intelligence or whatever overarching construct you're interested in, using a statistical process called factor analysis that we'll get into in more detail later. And design each individual test to be psychometrically strong enough to stand on its own. In other words, I know that I've covered the quote-unquote verbal domain well enough because I've asked questions that cover the full domain space, and I've asked enough questions that I'm confident that the score that I'm seeing isn't due to chance or bad luck. All this combined, I can take your verbal ability score and use that to make a decision on how well suited you are for a particular vocation or a specific job. With an aptitude battery, I can get a score on each specific test that was administered. So now I know how good you are at verbal ability, how good you are at math, at general reasoning, interpretation, and analysis. The list goes on and on. In a slightly separate vein, we have standardized achievement tests. These are tests like the SAT, the ACT, GRE. At the time, the only real testing was all through written or oral exams, which one, are very labor intensive for the examiner to score, but two, are also very subjective. Can you be certain that your examiner really evaluated each individual response using the exact same grading criteria? But also, similar to the problem we had before, are we comprehensively evaluating what students are expected to know? The first standardized test was the Standard Aptitude Test, developed in the 1920s, which was very widely used at the time, but also inspired the development of other standardized tests, both in the realm of education as well as expanded to civil service or other government jobs. And lastly, personality. The reality is, intelligence or even facets of aptitude are not everything. Think about a good customer service rep. It's not good enough that they're extremely smart. And in fact, you could argue that that isn't even a job requirement. Rather, when you think about a positive interaction you had with a customer service rep, you're probably thinking about them being friendly, engaging, helpful. Those are all things that are not measured in any of the kind of tests we've talked about in this chapter. This will get much more attention in later chapters, and also I will continue to talk about it because I'm very passionate about personality assessment tests. But the crux of this is, we know that there are individual differences in the multitude of personality facets that exist. And similar to intelligence and aptitude, those are meaningful differences, and we want to be able to measure those. There are several ways to measure personality. We have the prototypical self-report personality measure, where respondents are answering questions about themselves. Another method is through situational judgment tests, where a respondent is given a situation and asked how they would respond, with the idea being that we can tell a lot about your underlying level of a given personality facet simply by knowing how you would respond to a given situation. Again, much more to come on this section, so stay tuned. So, fairly short lecture on this one. All in all, psychological testing as a whole has evolved a lot throughout what's actually not a very long history compared to other fields. Some things we still continue on with, like personality tests. Some things in schools of thought that we've done away with completely, versus others we've simply modified to make sure that they're truly fit for purpose. Next time we'll start to get into the real meat of what makes tests psychometrically sound and how we evaluate them. Until next time.